Indeed, this committee is very conscious of the fact that this month Ireland holds the chair of the United Nations Security Council. Indeed, Minister Coveney, the Department of Foreign Affairs, Ireland's permanent representative at the United Nations, Geraldine Byrne-Nason, and her team have the full support of this committee in their work. This work, most important for Ireland, most important for the United Nations. Ireland can take pride in the fact that we have diplomats of the highest calibre working for Ireland and for international organisations such as the United Nations. Indeed, Minister Coveney is here this morning at his request to provide further information and clarification on the sequence of events surrounding the proposed nomination of Katherine Zappone as a UN Special Envoy. I intend to ensure that the Minister is given a fair hearing and that members of this committee will have adequate opportunity to question the Minister on matters relating to the sequence of events leading to the appointment. I expect these proceedings to be carried out in a dignified and respectful manner. The format of the meeting is that following your opening comments, Minister, I will then open the floor to questions from members. Each member has an 8-minute slot today to ask questions and for the Minister to respond. There will be no grouping of members. I will take members in order by party and group. Should time permit, members will be called again and allocated 1 minute for questions and the Minister allocated 1 minute to respond. I remind the Minister and members of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they shouldn't comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Also wish to remind members that they're only allowed to participate in this meeting if they're physically based and located within the Leinster House complex. I now call on you, Minister Coveney, to make your opening comments. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, just on a point of order before
Deputy Brady.
the Minister comes in, Chair. Chair, just as I said, a point of order. Last week, following the Minister's appearance before the committee, I and other members wrote to yourself stating that certainly it was my belief that the Minister gave misleading information before the committee. I asked that we would arrange to bring the Minister back in to the committee again, and subsequent to that request, the Minister sent a letter to the committee on Thursday of last week. Now, that letter appeared in certain media outlets online before committee members actually received a copy of that letter. So it appears that the letter was leaked to the media in advance of it coming to the committee or to committee members. And I think that is very, very serious. I think not alone is it very disrespectful, but it also calls the integrity of this committee into question. So, Chair, what I think needs to happen here immediately is that we write to the Business Committee and express our disquiet or unhappiness with that the way that process happened, that the media had this very important letter.
Yeah, I'll make 2 points on that, Deputy Brady, if you don't mind.
As well, because I think it is totally unsatisfactory, and it actually shows sheer contempt by the Minister and his officials towards this committee and committee members, Chair. So I propose that we write to the Business Committee and to the Ceann Comhairle to find out exactly how this happened and the exact timeline as well. Thanks,
yeah,
Chair.
I'll make 2 points on that, Deputy Brady. Firstly, it's not a point of order. A point of order deals with the proceedings and the process of the meeting. Secondly, I had the opportunity of speaking with you directly on this issue. The submission of any of the documents to members of the media before members of the committee was not an issue for this committee. Didn't happen on the part of anybody in this committee. And I don't believe there are any issues to be taken further to the Business Committee or the Ceann Comhairle as far as the disposition of this committee is concerned. We're under time constraints, Deputy Brady, as you well know, because you also mentioned to me.
Chair,
the 2-hour rule, Deputy Brady.
I don't accept that. We, as a committee, have a duty and an obligation to find out why the media had a critically important piece of correspondence before this committee, and I accept that you or the Secretariat did not have this letter before the media did. I accept that point. Someone within Fine Gael leaked this critically important letter to the media before it made its way to this committee, and I think it's incumbent on you as Chair to find out how that happened and why it happened. So I'm asking you as Chairperson to write to the Business Committee and find out how that letter and why that letter was leaked to the media before it made its way to us as an Oireachtas Committee. So, Chair, I'm asking you, and I'm calling
well, that exercise will be, Deputy
to
Brady, but I will remind you that this is not a point of order, and I will also remind you that some valuable committee time is already being expended by this extraneous issue. So I'm going to ask Minister Coveney to make his opening statement without interruption from any members of the committee. Minister Coveney, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come before you again today. The first thing I want to do is to apologise to all the committee members for creating the circumstances that require a second hearing in a week on the same issue of the appointment of a special envoy. Due to the sloppiness of some of my answers to your legitimate questions last week, we're back here again in order to, I hope, bring clarity to outstanding issues once and for all. Since last week, I have asked that all documentation available in my department be publicly released early in advance of the previous September 8th commitment to facilitate as detailed, accurate and comprehensive a presentation as possible today. In recent weeks, a lot has been said and written about me in the context of Katherine Zappone and her proposed appointment as a special envoy. The fact is that I have contributed to much of that criticism and commentary. I've had the privilege of being in public life for 23 years as a TD, an MEP and a government minister. I've made mistakes on that journey, but this is the first time that my integrity has been questioned on political actions. And while the Taoiseach has understandably sought to put some context around the political controversy of a part-time temporary appointment, in truth, this has rumbled on for far too long and should have come to an end on the basis of a clear and credible explanation well before now. A number of members asked me last week for a structured chronology of events, meetings, contacts, reports and decisions in relation to this appointment. I wasn't in a position to give that level of detail last week, but I certainly am now, and my department have published the files to do just that. Chair, before taking your questions, I would like to directly address a number of issues that, for understandable reasons, have been raised in public commentary. Firstly, Katherine Zappone did not ask me for a job at any stage. She did text me for advice on the 22nd of February about the possibility of working with USAID on women, gender equality and LGBTQ issues, and whether I could make an introduction for her. That's all she looked for from me at that point, and I didn't respond. Secondly, the idea of Katherine Zappone playing a role for the Irish government came about from a short conversation I had with my Secretary General on the 24th of February after a meeting, when I raised the question as to whether she might be of use to our team at the UN. I hadn't spoken to Katherine at that stage. The Secretary General responded positively, but said he wanted to take some time to think about it. I told Katherine Zappone of that conversation in a phone call on the 26th of February and agreed to come back to her when the Secretary General had any update. Niall Burgess subsequently came back to me a few days later, as he informed this committee last week, to say that the Biden administration would be appointing a special envoy for LGBTI+ rights, and that he was interested in the department exploring the benefits of such a role for Ireland. So it was in that context that I raised the possibility of a special envoy with Katherine Zappone and asked her if she'd be interested in such a role should the department develop and recommend it. That phone call was on the 3rd of March and triggered a text to me from Katherine the following day, enthusiastically thanking me for the opportunity. But it wasn't a job offer at that stage, as I made it very clear that the concept needed to be developed by the department, which is exactly what subsequently happened, as the files will show. Looking back now, I should have been clearer with Katherine on the content of the work, on the extent of the work needed in the department before a formal role could be offered to her. I didn't speak to Katherine Zappone again until the 19th of July, despite the fact that she had been looking for updates. And that brief conversation was just to confirm her meeting with Niall Burgess in Dublin to try to finalise matters. In the meantime, the department did extensive work, a food for thought paper on March 25th, a paper on envoys in the EU, the US and the UK on March 29th, an initial concept note on April 18th, and ultimately a special envoy terms of reference document in July. I've made mistakes in recent weeks in failing to convincingly explain how this role came about, and therefore contributing to what has become a political embarrassment for the government. But despite that, I hope that the documents before you today will confirm the department's due diligence on the potential benefits of this role for Ireland and the clear suitability of Katherine Zappone for the job proposed. My department is now reviewing the role and appointment process of special envoys for the future. I agree with the Taoiseach that from now on, should a special envoy be recommended, we should ensure an open, competitive process to fill any such position. Once again, thank you for your time and in particular your patience on this topic, and I look forward to trying to respond to all of your questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Deputy Barry Cowan. I will remind Deputy Cowan that we're very keen to have questions to the Minister in a direct and concise manner, that the Minister will reply. I said to Deputy Cowan that he's a total of 8 minutes in this session, and I will remind him on the expiry of 7. Deputy Cowan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank the Minister for making himself available again. I said here last week that this appointment was wrong from the get-go. Irrespective of blindsiding the Taoiseach or the Cabinet, it should never have been accepted. And it wasn't, but that wasn't the case. Inevitably, after public backlash, questions emerged, and many questions, as the Minister has said, remain to date. And despite subsequent and extensive interview with the News at 1, appearing here for over 2 hours last week, text release subsequent to that meeting by the Taoiseach, as you say, FOI eventually responded to yesterday, but the perception remains that Katherine Zappone lobbied the Finance Minister, then yourself, and then the Taoiseach, and indeed the Irish Ambassador to the UN thereafter, looking for a job in the UN. It appeared from that documentation that you offered her a position in March, and thereafter officials prepared credible documentation to support the need for such a role. Officials agreed terms with Katherine Zappone. You then informed the Taoiseach 12 days before the Cabinet meeting that she was very happy with what has been approved between her and Niall Burgess, the Secretary-General. Hopefully, as you rightly say, we can finally begin to put this saga to history, to bring what some has described as melodrama to an end. Melodrama which the Cabinet failed to nip in the bud initially, and ever since, because of the lack of clarity and failure to adhere to FOI requests and failure to understand that the government business by text is state property and not private data between ministers and former colleagues that can be deleted. So you're now saying, Minister, that when Katherine Zappone texts you to say that she was delighted with the offer, that the offer was a concept that she interpreted as a job offer. Is that correct? That is correct, isn't it?
Minister.
Yes.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Did the officials in the department know anything about this position prior to you offering the concept to Katherine Zappone?
Yeah, so just let me deal with that if I can.
Well, I'm conscious of the 8 minutes and the chairman's warning to me, because there's more questions to ask.
I had spoken to the Secretary General after Katherine had texted me on the 22nd of February asking for advice and an introduction to USAID, which is clearly an organisation she wanted to work with. I didn't respond to that, but I spoke to the Secretary General, as he confirmed to the committee last week, and he's here again today if you want him to make an intervention. We spoke on the 24th, and I raised the issue as to whether Katherine Zappone could be of use to our team in New York. He said he responded positively to that because he had worked with Katherine in the past, because she was previously a special envoy, don't forget, in relation to the Security Council campaign. But he said he wanted to think about it. I spoke to Katherine Zappone after that conversation, which is why she texted me on the 26th, effectively outlining her CV in terms of how she could be useful. But there is no reference there to a special envoy, because there had been no discussion on a special envoy at that point. Niall Burgess came back to me in early March to say that the Biden administration were putting in place a special envoy role to promote LGBTQ+ rights. He thought it was a good idea, and he wanted to explore that concept for Ireland within the department. That was in the context, obviously, of the previous conversation we'd had. I then went back to Katherine Zappone on the back of that information, of that conversation, as I said I would to her. I said I'd come back to her when Niall Burgess came back to me. And I had that conversation on the 3rd of March to say that the SecGen has come back to me with a concept around a special envoy role. That's what the US are doing. And now we need to explore it in the department. Would you be interested in that kind of role should it develop and the recommendation come through? She was very positive and excited about that possible role. And that's clear in her text the following day. But as I said in my opening statement, I think it would have been helpful if I had responded to her text to clarify that it wasn't a job offer at that stage. It was simply a concept that may materialise later on, which it subsequently did.
Okay, Deputy Cowan, please.
So she was delighted with the opportunity that the concept offered, or potentially offered.
Yeah, and that's what she says, Deputy, when she says, "Thank you so much for offering me this incredible opportunity."
But do you acknowledge from the documents that were released yesterday that it appeared that she played a part in defining the specifications for the job during the intervening period?
No, but I would like to ask maybe Niall Burgess to comment on that. I know you can't ask him questions directly, but I think it would be helpful if he did. No, because I think it is important to say that at no point did I discuss terms and conditions with Katherine Zappone. I specifically asked the department to do that. Okay. And I can ask if it's helpful. I can ask Niall Burgess to confirm that.
We can do that later. Just one last point. Katherine Zappone had conducted work at the United Nations for Ireland, and you alluded to that fact yourself when you said about the role that she had in relation to the effort to ensure we were successful in relation to our place on the Security Council. When she was a minister in the Fine Gael-led government, were you given any advice by your department officials, or did it occur to yourself about whether she was entitled to seek, to look, or to suggest or investigate the concept of a position within the UN, in light of the fact that there's a 1-year cooling off period for ministers when they're not allowed to engage in any such discussion around the prospect or concept of working within the UN or public bodies for which they interacted as ministers, as a minister? There is within the handbook, as you know, and the Commission, standards in public office would allude to this, that there is legislation around this whole area of a cooling off period. And I know it caused some controversy in the last year.
1 minute left, Deputy Count.
Former Deputy DC, or Senator DC, initiated a concept within government to lengthen that period of cooling off. But were you aware that this possibly contradicted the thrust and the detail within that legislation, and that this may still be an issue?
Minister.
Well, first of all, Katherine Zappone wasn't and isn't entitled to anything, and she, like any other former minister in government, has to comply with legislation. Of course, she does. I mean, this came about on the back of Katherine Zappone reaching out for some advice from me. She spoke, I understand, late last year to Paschal Donoghue. He suggested that she contact me because I'm the Minister for Foreign Affairs. She was clearly trying to develop a career in the UN. She was living in New York.
But does that very fact clear? You just said clearly trying to find a role for herself within the UN.
Yeah, but she had.
Is the legislation such that she's not entitled to even
A very brief response from the Minister, because I'm anxious to proceed to Deputy Brady.
Yeah, let me answer.
Period that's required under legislation.
Yeah, let me answer. I mean, that was a matter for Katherine, but in my view,
I didn't say for you in offering a concept that turned out to be a role.
No, I don't believe
you two are aware of the rules and regulations associated with the legislation, which has a cooling off period. Surely it would be for you or your officials within your department to point that out, to say this is not on, lads, I'm afraid. For that very reason, if none other.
Well, I don't believe there was a conflict of interest, but we were developing a concept around a special envoy role. I believe she was qualified for that job. It was a matter for Katherine to deal with any conflict of interest issues. I didn't see any conflict of interest, and I certainly didn't get any advice from my officials to that effect.
Well, maybe your official, when he's answering the other questions you said he might be able to help us with, would comment on that fact too in relation to legislation governing the cooling off period, which is essential.
I'm sure we'll have an opportunity there, Deputy Cowan, coming back to this important issue.
Chair, do I have time in this exchange to ask Niall Burgess to make a brief intervention?
We'll come back to in relation. We'll come back to Niall Burgess in the course of the meeting on that point. I need to call Deputy Brady, whose 8 minutes are commencing now. Deputy Brady, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Well, Minister, you came here last week and, in my view, made a deliberate attempt to mislead this committee. You claimed that at no time did you feel that Katherine Zappone was lobbying for a job, yet it's abundantly clear that Ms Zappone not only sought a plum position that would grant her to access to the UN, but she undertook a campaign to lobby for that position. Minister, she lobbied you, she lobbied Minister Paschal Donoghue, she lobbied the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, she even lobbied senior diplomats such as the Irish ambassador to the UN, Geraldine Byrne, and you and your ministerial colleagues delivered for her. And what has been revealed, Minister, is nothing more than plain old-fashioned political strokes, which, when uncovered, led to a scramble for cover by you, your officials, and indeed other ministers, deleting messages, changing stories, changing your narrative, providing misleading statements as you did last week, which has ultimately taken us to where we are now. Minister, you sought to downplay your role in the entire process, the knowledge that other senior Fine Gael people had, such as Paschal Donoghue, where it's evidently clear now, knew exactly what was going on around this appointment at least 4 months before Cabinet, and with the Taoiseach at least 11 days before the Cabinet meeting. Minister, as I said, you misled the committee last week when you said clearly that you did not relay anything to Katherine Zappone because I did not speak to her when she was in Dublin. And also that in and around the February 21st was the last time that you spoke to Ms Zappone, and you essentially left the entire process up to your officials at that point. And the published data now graphically shows in an entirely different story to the yarn that you've tried to spin, not just to the committee members, but the public as a whole. So I've a number of questions now I want to put to you, and I just want to follow up on that initial point there, just on the cooling off period, which I think is very important, because in your evidence last week, Minister, you stated that in a conversation you had with Katherine Zappone last summer, that she had offered her services in a private or professional capacity to your department, to you, and the work you are doing at a UN level. So again, I put that question to you. What exactly you done at that point in terms of challenging Katherine Zappone, in terms of the lobbying, in terms of the legislation and the requirement for cooling off? Did you point out at that stage that that was a breach of the legislation, Minister?
Thanks, Deputy Minister.
No, I didn't. Because
okay, no, that's fine, Minister. So you didn't challenge her at that point that she was breaching the legislation and offering her services in either a private or professional.
Deputy, as I said previously,
Minister, I'll move on. Last week, you stated that you had a conversation in and around the 21st of February when you spoke to Katherine Zappone. The release data now shows that it was actually a text message from Katherine Zappone on the 22nd of February. And that also stated in that text message from Katherine Zappone that you had spoken to Paschal Donoghue. She says, I know Paschal has spoken with you about my interest. So can I ask, when did you speak to Paschal Donoghue, and what records are there of that conversation?
Minister, please.
Yeah, I had an informal conversation with Paschal Donoghue in late January, early February, from recollection. The only content of that conversation was that Paschal said that I may get contact from Katherine Zappone with a view to taking advice in relation to work in the UN in New York. That was it.
Okay, was that a phone conversation or was that via text?
It was a phone conversation.
Phone conversation, and there's no records of that conversation taking place anywhere, Minister, is there?
There isn't. I don't even recall the exact date, but it was early in the new year.
On the 24th of February then, Minister, you had a meeting with your Secretary-General, Niall Borges, and you said at the tail end of that meeting, you posed this prospect of the creation of a role with the Secretary-General. Are there any records of that conversation?
No, there aren't. There are records of the meeting.
Are there any text messages between yourself and the Secretary General?
It was as I explained last week. It was a conversation in person that I had at the end of a meeting that I had scheduled with Niall Burgess to talk about the appointment of ambassadors and to talk about our first 2 months in the Security Council. At the end of that meeting, I had a brief exchange on this issue. Niall Burgess responded positively to it.
Okay, so there's no records of that conversation. So it wasn't done in a formal capacity. It was an ad hoc approach.
It was an informal conversation, which wouldn't be unusual. The Secretary General's office is below my office. I often speak to him in the evening.
Okay, thanks, Minister. Then on the 26th, the records show that you had another phone conversation with Katherine Zappone. And what was the nature of that conversation?
So that was the first phone call I had with Katherine Zappone since the end of the previous summer. She texted. I had a missed phone call from her on the 26th, which is on the record, and I responded to that. I rang her back. And I had a conversation with her to relay first of all, to say that I had no introduction to USAID, but secondly, that I had had a conversation with the Secretary General as to whether Katherine could be of assistance to our team in New York, but we didn't have anything further on it. She responds to me by text to say thank you for the call, and she effectively outlines her own CV and then asks me if there's anything else I need to know.
Thank you. 1 minute, Deputy Brady, please.
Following that conversation you had with Katherine Zappone, did you speak to Paschal Donoghue at any point following that conversation on the 26th? No. Okay. Minister, on the 4th of March, there's a text then from Katherine Zappone stating that she thanking you so much for offering me this incredible opportunity. It will be such a privilege, and I will be so proud to serve Ireland again. What did you offer her? That was a job offer. And it's quite unbelievable that you offered that position to Katherine Zappone, and then on the 23rd there was internal emails within your department to go and try create some sort of UN envoy position around human rights. So what you offered Katherine Zappone a job on the fort, in and around the 4th of March. Would I be right in saying that?
Brief response from the Minister, please.
Yeah. No, you wouldn't be right, Deputy. And I've outlined the sequence of events as to what happened there. After the conversation on the 26th, Niall Burgess came back to me and told me that the US was developing a special envoy role in the area of LGBT plus promotion, and that he wanted to develop. No, please let me finish, Deputy. Chair, I'd like the opportunity to finish.
Deputy Brady, please, the time has been exhausted.
I think it's important because I think what you're trying to do now, you're trying to fix the documents to fit a wholly unbelievable narrative. This job was offered, it was accepted. The department only then at that point said about...
Deputy Brady, please, the time slot has been exhausted.
One final question, Chair. And I
Deputy,
think
that's an interpretation that you're trying to put on it.
The text communication on the 19th of July, where a critical intervention...
I remind Deputy Brady, please.
Lobby from the Taoiseach. The Minister then phoned Katherine Zappone when she was in Dublin, also phoned the Secretary-General to set up a critical meeting where the terms were agreed.
I asked Deputy Brady, please. I asked Deputy Brady for the third time, please.
And the Secretary-General, and the duration of the contract was also agreed. So, Minister,
I remind Deputy Brady, we agreed the time slots. In fairness to other members, Deputy Brady, please.
Intervened. So, Minister, I put it to you that your critical intervention at that stage, following lobbying, was instrumental in terms of getting this over the line. Would I be right in saying that?
No, you wouldn't, Deputy, and you're trying to infer a whole series of political charges there that simply aren't true.
Minister, you misled the committee. You said
okay, thank you, Minister, please. We're moving on to Senator Joe O'Reilly.
So on the 19th of July, you had a critical intervention at that stage.
Deputy Brady.
You phoned Katherine Zappone and you phoned the Secretary-General to finalise the details of the contract.
Thank you.
I ask you again, Deputy Brady, please to abide by the agreement in respect of the format of the meeting and the process. I'm moving on to Senator Joe O'Reilly. We may have an opportunity later on, Deputy Brady, to come back for supplementaries, but if deputies continue to go over time in the manner in which you have, that may not be possible. Senator Joe O'Reilly, please. Some direct questions to the Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to the committee, Minister. I have 3 questions at this juncture and may avail of the opportunity to come in later. Question 1. Minister, could you explain the interplay between yourself and the Secretary-General? It sounds and reads like this is something that you brought forward together, and I'd like you to elaborate and comment on that. Question 2. What other units of your department or entities other than the Secretary-General were involved in assessing the role, and were they positive on it? Obviously, that's the role being offered to former Minister Zappone. And third question, Minister. Last week, I was the first on the committee to raise the possibility with you, and time was an issue then, but now, please God, you can answer this. Would you, the possibility of this committee being initially involved in a shortlisting process for future similar appointments. Could you comment on this, and could you give your view on this, and could you give us a commitment in that area? Because I do think we could fulfil a very important scrutinising role.
Thank you, Senator O'Reilly. I will remind Minister of an overlap of some questions, and it may be opportune in the course of this session to invite a brief comment from former Secretary General Burgess, as mentioned by you earlier, Minister. Minister, please. 3 questions.
First of all, I will invite former Secretary General Burgess to make a brief comment, but can I just say, in relation to the inference from the previous series of questions, that somehow I instructed the department to create a job or something. That is not the case. Anybody who knows the former Secretary General of my department, and indeed how my department functions, believe me, they say no to me when they don't agree with the decision or if they're not comfortable with it. That was not the case here. I worked with the Secretary General. We saw as an opportunity a special envoy role in this space. It was what many other countries were doing at the same time. The UK also announced a special envoy for LGBTQ rights, and other countries have been doing the same. We saw it as an opportunity. We saw Katherine Zappone as an experienced person who was suitable for that role, and we developed that concept robustly in the department and got no negative feedback from our team in Geneva, who are the human rights experts, from our team in New York, who are working in the UN, and from the team in Dublin. But I would like to ask the SecGen to make a brief comment, if he may, to back up what he already said to the committee last week. So
thank you.
now
Mr. Burgess, please.
at this stage.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be very brief, conscious of time. After our initial conversation in February, and quite shortly afterwards, I came back to the Minister and told him that I had seen that the Biden administration was appointing a special envoy for LGBTI+ rights. I said that I was going to explore whether or not we could take value in the department's work from a similar mechanism, and that work was initiated quite quickly and was underway through March. I did that conscious of the scale of work across the department in supporting LGBTI+ rights, and you have an indication of that scale in tab 16, where you have a report on an update to the implementation committee on LGBTI+ inclusion on the work across the department. That work continued until towards the end of March. When that work was concluded, I asked our political director to examine that further through the prism of our wider human rights work. That work itself took about another month. During that period, during those 2 months, the Minister and our development of the mandate.
Mr. Burgess. Back to you, Minister, on the matter of Senator O'Reilly's questions. I think you're muted, Minister.
Sorry, apologies. In terms of other work that the department did on this, and as the former Secretary General said, there was no political input. This was technical work from experts in different sections of the department. There was a food for thought paper prepared in the context of DFA responsibilities and implementation of the National LGBTI+ Inclusion Strategy. That was finalised on the 25th of March. There was an overview prepared of practice in other EU member states, in the UK and in the US, on appointments of ambassadors and envoys with human rights responsibilities. And the committee will have that detailed paper, which show that virtually every country in the Western world was developing similar kinds of roles. On the 18th of April then, after exchanges between political division and the team in Geneva and Dublin, there was a concept note prepared setting out the rationale and scope for the appointment of an envoy in the human rights sphere. And then if you move right up until July, you'll see that a special envoy terms of reference, a rationale, a tasking, a time frame and support was emailed. So there was extensive work, which I was not involved in, but I knew was going on in the department because the SecGen had told me so. That's the position. In terms of the final question from Senator O'Reilly around the future involvement of the committee, I have said last week, and I say it again today, mistakes have been made by me here that have undermined the credibility of appointing special envoys in the future. I would like to depoliticize that process in the future and try to get all party agreement in relation to how or if special envoys should be appointed in the future. And certainly I'm happy to work with the committee on that.
Thank you, Minister. Senator O'Reilly, I take it you're pleased with those. We can move on to Deputy Gannon.
Yes, thank
Senator?
you.
Thank you. Moving to Deputy Gary Gannon. Deputy Gannon, please,
Yes.
8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Committee Chair. Minister, I have 8 minutes and I intend to defend my time. Minister, I just want to bring you back to March 4th when former Minister Katherine Zappone texted you thanking her for the job. You've already stated you didn't dissuade her from that notion and you regret not dissuading her from that notion, yes?
Yeah, Deputy, I think it would have been helpful, with the benefit of hindsight, if I had responded to that text. I mean, as you'll see from a lot of her texts, I did.
Yeah, and I just want to go to another text, Minister. So then on the May the 4th, so Katherine Zappone wasn't offered a job on March. On May the 4th, she texted you then saying, and I quote, "Hi Simon, hope all well. Any news yet? You have mentioned June as a start date. Now you mentioned in your contribution that you didn't speak to Katherine Zappone between March and July. So if you didn't speak between those times, why did Katherine Zappone text you saying that you had previously mentioned June as a start date if no job was offered in your communication before then?"
Well, I had spoken to her on 2 dates, on the 26th of February, when she was when I basically told her that I'd spoken to the Sec Gen about whether we could use her, which she was happy about, but I said there was no role. At that stage, I asked her what she was doing. She confirmed that she was working with UNFPA until the middle or the end of June. And so when I came back to her and said, look, we're looking to develop potentially a role of a special envoy position, would you be interested in that? That conversation referred also to the fact that it was going to take some time to do that. And
So
she said to me,
okay.
she said to me that she was working in the UN system, in UNFPA, until the end of June. And I had said, well, look, it's going to take us time to develop this role anyway. But it may materialise after that. That's where that came from.
But she had a start date for a job that didn't exist yet, and she hadn't been offered. And there was no record of you dissuading her from that notion. So in 2 text messages, thank you for the opportunity, thank you for the job on March 4th, and then on May the 4th, she had a start date for a job that wasn't designed and that hadn't been offered to her. It barely seems believable. But I want to go to another part.
But can I make one further comment just briefly on it, if I can, Deputy? The end of June was Pride Week, so when I said to her that the department was going to work on this, I did say to her that, look, I hope we'd be able to have this done by the summer, by Pride Week, in terms of the process in the department. And she clearly took from that she wanted to job to be announced at that point.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, last week in your contribution to the committee, you specifically said, and you brought the word lobbying into that contribution, you specifically said that you didn't feel that Katherine Zappone was lobbying you for a job. Do you want to reflect on that and change any part of that for the committee now? Do you still feel Katherine Zappone wasn't lobbying?
I think, that is my view. I never felt pressure from Katherine Zappone in relation to this job. If I had, I would have been responding back to her. I mean, if anything, I potentially could be criticised for largely ignoring her text.
I don't only necessarily think this is a criticism. I think this is in keeping with regulations that are very clearly laid out. So this is not a criticism. This is actually in keeping with regulations. So, Minister, what exactly is your understanding of lobbying? Do you accept that seeking to influence senior ministers in relation to the awarding of a plum job constitutes lobbying? In the case of Katherine Zappone, we know that she contacted the Minister for Finance, Pascal Donoghue, the Taoiseach. She contacted Ireland's ambassador to the UN, Geraldine Bourne-Nason, and she also contacted you, Minister for Foreign Affairs, about the job and about also being asked for an introduction to Samantha Power, contacted both Pascal Donoghue and yourself. Minister, how do you not believe that to be lobbying? And it makes me wonder, who else is contacting you that we don't know about if that's not an interpretation of lobbying? And also, why does it not appear in the lobbying register? If she's contacting Pascal Donoghue, who then contacted you, that is not appearing in the lobbying register. Both Minister Zappone and I believe when Pascal Donoghue contacted you, there was an obligation for him to place that into a register of lobbying.
No, well, I just don't accept that interpretation of events. And, Pascal Donoghue is a friend of Katherine Zappone. I don't know how many times Pascal would have spoken to Katherine at various different times in the last year, but she asked Pascal for advice at some point late last year. Pascal suggested to her that she make contact with me to get advice on a career in the UN, because I'm the Minister for Foreign Affairs.
So no lobbying there. So friends of ministers who previously were ministers don't actually come under the same conditions as the rest of us simply because they're friends. And Minister,
no, they do.
I'm actually I'm alarmed.
No, Deputy, to be fair, I would get sometimes contacted by people I don't know at all to seek advice in relation to career choices and so on. And I didn't see this as any different to that. I certainly didn't see it as formal lobbying.
Minister, I'm actually alarmed by how narrow your interpretation of lobbying is, but I'm going to move on to another question. Minister, you've been Minister for more than 10 years now. How long have you been deleting text messages from your phone? And are you aware that if you delete texts which record official government business without making a copy, that you are in breach of the Freedom of Information Act?
Yeah, well, Deputy, as I said last week, I do clear texts from my phone when conversations conclude. There's a security element to that. I don't want to overplay the security issue, but it is an issue for me. And as a matter of course, when I don't think it's necessary to have text messages on my phone because something has concluded and we're moving on from it, I would often clear the phone of those text conversations.
So when
That's
did you
what
clear
happened.
the text message? Can you specifically tell me when you cleared the text message between yourself and Leo Varadkar talking about the appointment of Katherine Zappone? On what date did you delete that text message?
Yeah, I cleared it very shortly after that conversation. I went to Africa the following day. And I certainly didn't hang on to that text because I thought there was a start and an end to it. He asked a question and I responded to it. Can I say, though, that if I was trying to hide the existence of text messages, I wouldn't have made all of my text messages available to the FOI request. If I was trying to hide the text message, if I could finish, and I'll be brief, Deputy, if I was trying to hide the existence of a text exchange with the Taoiseach, I wouldn't have introduced it to the public in this committee last week, which is what I did. I have not tried to hide anything here, and I certainly didn't delete texts in an effort to hide anything.
Into your final minute. Final question, Deputy Gannon, please.
Specifically pertaining to the deletion of text between two ministers discussing an issue of the state in contravention of the Freedom of Information Act. And I asked for a date, and that wasn't forthcoming. And I asked for your knowledge in relation to, are you aware of the guidelines in that act? And
well, what I have said clearly, Deputy, is that text exchange was deleted from my phone before the Freedom of Information requests came in.
Convenient.
Thank you, Deputy Gannon. Proceeding to my next listee, Senator Gerard Crockwell. Senator Crockwell, are you with us?
Thank you, Chairman. Minister, thank you for returning to the House to deal with this unfortunate state of affairs. Minister, I'm somewhat surprised by the apparent unguarded manner in which you oversaw your ministerial responsibility for the security of the information communication from and to your phone, issued to you by the state as Minister for Foreign Affairs, but more especially as Minister for Defence. As Minister for Defence, you have ministerial and political responsibility for the Defence Forces, one of the two organs of the state directly responsible for state security and state intelligence. Your role as Minister for Defence may well have been more crucial to would-be illegal interceptions of your voice and text communications for a more significant reason. Minister, are you familiar with the Interception of Postal Packages and Telecommunications Messages Act of 1993, which authorised both the Garda Commissioner and the Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces to seek an order from an authorised officer, a judge of the High Court, to intercept postal and electronic messages under Section 6 of the said Act? Can I ask, Minister, was your phone issued to you by the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Department of Defence, or indeed the Defence Forces? If it was issued to you by the Defence Forces, then I believe it would have been an encrypted phone from the Department Defence Forces Communications and Information Systems Corps, as befits the role of a minister overseeing one of the two security and intelligence services of the state. Minister, given your role as and Ireland's seat on the United Nations Security Council, did the Communications and Information System issue you with an encrypted phone? Did you request an encrypted phone? If you were not working off an encrypted phone, would you accept that this would be reckless behaviour in the extreme, betraying and compromising state security and the messages from a foreign minister of a country on the United Nations Security Council? This would beggar belief. Minister, I want to ask you straight out, yes or no, did the political gravity of the interceptions on your voice and text messages occur to you at all?
Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Senator, and I know that you understand security issues well. My phone has been the phone that I use has been issued to me by the Department of Foreign Affairs. I am cautious about the use of that phone because the phone has been compromised. It's a matter of public record and was featured in the media last year that in August 2020 I was subject to a phishing attack via the Telegram messaging app on my mobile phone. Using credentials created on this platform, my identity was used to contact
all right, Minister,
several foreign.
that's fine. We don't need to go into great detail on this.
Well, I would like to answer your question, Deputy.
Was the phone encrypted?
Senator Crockwell, please, you've asked a number of very important questions that haven't been asked before, and in fairness, I think we should give the Minister an opportunity to reply.
Sorry, you asked me whether I was aware of the political consequences of that, and I was. And officials in the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Defence determined that this incident fell in into the realm of a cyber attack and made the appropriate notifications to Garda Síochána, and I handed my phone over to Garda Síochána at that point, and the National Cybersecurity Centre, where I took extensive advice from the head of the National Cybersecurity Centre in relation to that incident. I would remind deputies, though, that security relating to mobile phones in the context of foreign ministers or indeed prime ministers is an issue that most people would be aware of. It's no secret, for example, that Chancellor Merkel would have had her phone hacked as Chancellor of Germany. So, you know, unfortunately, in the world we live in today, despite security arrangements, there are some who will look to try to hack people's phones and access information. And so I'm cautious as a result, which is why I don't hold on to data unnecessarily on my phone.
Thank you, Senator Crockwell.
Okay, Minister, thank you for that. Minister, once you became aware of the, I suppose, interception of your phone, whether it was number spoofing or an actual hacking, I'm not sure. I'm asking you straight out, yes or no answer. Was the Director of Intelligence and the Defence Forces Communications and Information System Corps, the Director of that Corps, were they both advised of the hacking or number spoofing that took place? A simple yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. Minister, I want now to turn to the role of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. I want to know, when you first contacted Minister McGrath about the costs of the special envoy, you or your department, the role that that envoy would have, the salary, what type of travel arrangements would the envoy have? Could they travel anywhere in the world at any time they wanted? Would they be fully expensed and paid for the days that they would travel? Because the 15,000 figure that's been quoted to me sounds very, very low. I'll continue on if I may, because this is all in the same vein.
I'll remind the Senator that the Minister is the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence. He's not the Minister for Public Expenditure. And there may be issues that you're asking that are not within the competence of the Minister to respond.
Any expenditure on behalf of the state has to be approved by Public Expenditure and Reform. So, I mean, I need to know when Public Expenditure and Reform were contacted, because there is a number of dates being thrown around here, and we're not sure exactly who.
Yeah, I'll happily answer that, Deputy.
Okay.
Our Senator, Chair. So in relation to the Department of Public Expenditure, my department did not seek sanction for the position from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in relation to this position. My department has a pay and staffing sanction from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform that did not require additional approval for this post. Having said that, my department did make contact, I think it was the day before the cabinet meeting, to seek clarification in relation to a pension issue, as far as I'm aware. But I can ask my current SecGen, to Joe Hackett, if he'd like to comment briefly on that issue.
Thank you.
Just before he does, can I come back in, Minister, because what I'm going to ask next.
But only in relation to an issue that's going to be addressed.
In terms of things like travel arrangements and so on, I asked my former Sec Gen to negotiate with Katherine Zappone and to outline what it was involved in the position, and if it's helpful, I can ask him to talk you through that. But it's certainly nothing unusual. We use the precedent of another special envoy who's in the department, the special envoy for Francophone Africa, in terms of some of those terms and conditions.
Okay, they can deal with that in a moment.
Final minute, Senator Crockwell.
Were you aware of the potential impact of pension abatement on Ms. Zappone? Did you discuss pension abatement with the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform? Did you or Ms. Zappone seek a waiver of pension abatement with respect to this role? Can you clarify that for me, please?
Minister?
The answer is no to all of those questions.
Okay. Minister, you spoke a little while ago about the cooling off period. You have been in public office for 20 years. You clearly would be aware of the cooling off period that applies to particularly people who have ministerial posts. I'm rather surprised that you were discussing an appointment within that 12-month period with a former minister who must surely have been aware of the situation as well. Have you anything more that you want to say about that?
I don't, except to say that a cooling off period only applies if there's a conflict of interest, and I didn't see a conflict of interest.
Thank you. Moving on.
Okay, I'm out of time. Okay,
thank you, Senator Crockwell. We may have an opportunity later on to come back with a further supplementary. Thank you, Minister, for dealing with those. Moving on to Deputy James Lawless, followed by Deputy Circuit Clerk. Deputy Lawless, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming back to us today for these further clarifications. Minister, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to ask a number of questions and take responses as they come through. We know that Katherine Zappone was appointed as an envoy in 2019 in a previous round while she was serving as a minister. Whose idea was it that she take on that role at that time, Minister?
Sorry, Deputy, could you repeat that question? Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Minister. So Katherine Zappone previously served as an envoy in 2019 while also serving as a minister. Whose idea was it that she would be appointed an envoy at that time?
That was the idea of my department, because we had, I think, 12 envoys at the time. We were campaigning to be on the Security Council. You might remember it was a very competitive campaign. There was Norway, Ireland and Canada, three very prominent countries in the UN system. And we were competing against each other for 2 places. And many people were surprised that Ireland got more votes than Canada did. But part of the reason for that is that we had a dozen special work that she was interested in, and some of the travel that she's done. So that was the position. She was asked to be a special envoy for the 9 months.
She didn't volunteer for it. So she didn't volunteer herself to do the role at that time.
I can't remember the exact sequence of events, to be honest.
She may have put herself forward as
our department was certainly keen that she would play a role.
Okay.
And she did, and she assisted significantly.
Okay, thank you, Minister. But you're not precluding the possibility that she came forward with the idea herself of serving as an envoy in 2019.
I don't think she ever came forward with a request to be an envoy. She clearly wanted to assist our campaign. I believe that we came back to her as a department and asked her to be an envoy.
Okay. The descriptions and the correspondence has what I would call a very US-centric flavour. We heard your Secretary General talking about how the Biden administration was making appointments. We see a memo in the correspondence which talks about the role of special envoy being a somewhat US-specific one. EU member states typically use ambassador at large as a title instead. All of this, I suppose, circles back into the assumption or the presumption that Katherine Zappone was heavily involved in writing this job description herself and indeed in pitching it. How do you respond to that, Minister?
Well, all I can say to that, Deputy, is that it is simply not true. At no point in any of the correspondence or in any of the documentation does Katherine Zappone ask me or the department to make her a special envoy. The contact came the other way, as I have said, and as the former Secretary General has confirmed. I spoke to him about whether or not we could use Katherine Zappone in our team in New York because we felt that she could be an asset. We didn't quite know how to do that. Niall Burgess came back to me a few days later to say the US were developing a special envoy role, and as it subsequently turned out, lots of other countries are doing something similar. And then I went to Katherine Zappone to say, look, I spoke to the Sec Gen about this. There's a possibility if the department approves it and develops this role. She was very excited about that, and I think that's very clear from her texts.
Yes, thank you, Minister. Another one of her texts earlier in the process asked for an introduction to Samantha Power, who of course is a close aide of the Biden administration. Did you make that introduction, Minister? No,
I didn't, and I didn't even respond to that message. Samantha Power is, of course, the head of USAID. She's a very prominent Irish American. I know of Samantha Power, but I certainly wouldn't know her well enough to make an introduction like this, and I don't think it would have been appropriate anyway, so I didn't do it.
Okay, very good. Minister, you made a comment earlier that you're very often contacted by people in regard to their career choices. Young people didn't leave us today.
I think we all are, Deputy.
We all are, but not all of us
part of public life.
Exactly, and indeed the CEO points are coming out today, and many of us will be contacted by young people in our constituencies. But we're not usually in a position to make up a tailor-made job and appoint them to it. You see how it's a little bit different, Minister, to the run-of-the-mill constituency query we might get?
I do, and I can see how people would read that interpretation into this, which is why I regret that I haven't provided more clarification in relation to what happened here before now. And I understand why the politics of this has been controversial. But all I can say is that the department went through a pretty rigorous process to develop and recommend the role that subsequently was offered to Katherine Zappone. I mentioned it to her early in the process to see if she'd be interested. And as I said before, she enthusiastically responded to that in a text, which certainly makes it look like it was a job offer earlier on, but it wasn't. And she should have known that as a government minister, a previous government minister.
Yes. Her enthusiasm is very clear. That's certainly apparent. Minister, you talked about you're being hacked and deleting messages. And can I ask you, did you delete messages on advice from maybe a cybersecurity advisor, from a Garda even, or a security advisor, or did you take it on yourself to do, not necessarily these particular messages, although those as well, but in general, do you have a particular protocol that you use to determine whether it's public or private business, or how do you just clear down the phone every week, or how does that work?
Well, the way it works is that I think it's prudent to remove information on my phone that's no longer relevant. In other words, if I've had a text conversation with somebody that's done and dusted and I'm moving on from it, I would often clear that unless there's a reason to hold on to it. And certainly when I had the text exchange with the Taoiseach, I regarded that matter is closed, and I removed it from my phone in the same way that I would do with lots of other text exchanges with people. I was subsequently very pleased that the Taoiseach published those texts because I think they backed up the thrust of what I said to the committee last week when I volunteered the information, and I was the first to do it, that there was any text exchange at all between myself and the Taoiseach. I think it was in response to questions from Deputy Cowan.
Yes, Minister, but I suppose you say when you have no reason to hang on to it, but do you accept now that freedom of information, amongst other things, would be a data protection, also the duty to preserve data, the freedom of information obligations upon a delegated official? I hope do you now understand why there would have been a reason to hang on to those exchanges?
Well, if I had a freedom of information request in relation to those exchanges, yes, but that happened before those requests came in, which came in the day after the cabinet meeting.
Okay. Final minute, Deputy Lawless.
Yes, just moving on to, I suppose, the blurring between personal and public business. Minister, have you ever used your private email account for public business?
No, I don't do that. And the public business and department business should be on the department account.
Okay, my last question, Chair, because I'm conscious of time. Minister, I asked you last week about how the Taoiseach came to be in knowledge of this issue on the morning or at the cabinet meeting, and at the time we thought perhaps this had emerged as a week or two previously. Given that we know now that it was in detailed perusal and specification with Secretary Generals, ministers, a number of ministers, going back 3, 4, 5 months, It seems incredulous that nobody thought to alert the Taoiseach to the appointment of clearly a political move, something the department was excited about by all accounts, something that was seen as a significant positive, actually, I think, in your view at the time, and something that at least would have a political interest, being a former minister. How can it be that from March, April, May, June, July, nobody amongst anybody involved thought it was worth advising the Taoiseach of this?
Thank you. Time exhausted. A brief response from the Minister to this question.
Yeah. I mean, that was a mistake by me, and I should have personally told the Taoiseach that this appointment was coming up. I honestly didn't see it as a controversial appointment. There were a lot of other things on that day that many people thought would have been much more substantial than this part-time appointment. But that was a mistake by me. A Taoiseach should never be hearing something for the first time in a cabinet meeting. And I telephoned the Taoiseach after that cabinet meeting that evening, and I apologised for allowing that to happen.
Thank you, Minister. And thank you, Deputy Doris. Next, Deputy Circuit Clerk, please. Deputy Clerk, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister, again this morning. Minister, it's clear you offered Katherine Zappone the job as UN Special Envoy in March, very early March. And what's also clear, and you've acknowledged the same, is that you knew Katherine Zappone wanted the role in the UN, and you made that happen. You made that happen for a friend. It's clear Ms. Zappone wrote the job description and that the terms of employment was attached to it. That left your department justifying why the appointment was made. And that, Minister, is absolutely disgraceful. On July 30th, you told National Radio that the job wasn't made for her. However, the documents released yesterday tell a vastly different story, because the reality is that she wrote the job spec, she influenced the duration of the role, and when the brief came to be finalised, Katherine Zappone herself literally submitted her own brief and told you by text that a concept note was being developed. You also said in the media that Fine Gael ministers knew nothing of the appointment until 20 minutes before the cabinet meeting. That's also not true, Minister, because we now know that the Taoiseach knew 11 days beforehand and Paschal Donoghue much, much earlier. So, Minister, I'm going to put it to you that you misled Cabinet. You've misled this committee through an extreme economy of truths. Now, what I also want to put to you, Minister, is this. You are not truthful then, and you are not being entirely truthful now, despite being given 2 opportunities by this committee to do so. And as a member of this committee, I am deeply concerned that any minister would seek to use this committee in what appears to be an effort to save his own political neck, because that reeks of the sense of entitlement that has brought us here today. Now, what I will also move on to is this. There has been a lot of communication released, communication traffic between Katherine Zappone and key players, and her access that she had to you, your department, cabinet and government. There was pressurising. Now, you can deny it, but repeated messages in my world is pressurising and pushing for this job to such an extent that when she wasn't getting the response that she wanted, she approached our UN or rep in the UN and raised it before months before the government knew. We know that Katherine Zappone had direct access, that she used that access to you, the department, the rep in the UN, to Paschal Donoghue and to Leo Varadkar. So, Minister, who else do you know of that she had direct access to? And in that use of soft power, she used her exposure to high-ranking officials to her own ends, for her own gain, and you, Minister, played a central role in that. How can you sit here today and continue to justify your statement that there was no lobbying? Because there was. Very clearly, there was.
Minister.
Okay, well, Deputy, first of all, I give my own department an awful lot more credit than you give them. You're essentially accusing my former Sec Gen of lying as well. If what you've just outlined is your position. All I can say is the sequence of events as they happened are as I have outlined them today. The Freedom of Information release backs that up. I was the one who mentioned Special Envoy role to Katherine Zappone for the first time. She did not raise it with me and didn't look for updates on that potential role until after the conversation that I had with her. The conversation I had with her was triggered by 2 conversations that I'd had with my Secretary General in relation to discussing whether or not she may be of use to our team in New York.
Okay, Minister, can I just come in there in relation
and
to
so
communication with your
I would
Secretary
accept, Deputy, that my answers to this committee have been somewhat sloppy last week, and that has raised ambiguity and so on. And you're rightly probing hard on those issues, because I should have been
Minister,
a lot
how can you
clearer
remain
last
to
week.
be sloppy in your answers 23 years in government or 23 years in public life?
Well,
have you not learned at this point to not walk into doors? Because after 23 years, one would have expected that to be the very least. But I do want to go back to the communication with the Secretary General. Does it strike you as acceptable that Katherine Zappone was emailing the Secretary General in July of this year from an email account associated with a company that she was a director of, a company that was struck off the company register at her own request in June of 2017, a company called the Centre for Progressive Change?
I simply don't have.
Does that not strike you as odd, Minister?
But all I can say is that Katherine Zappone was in contact with my Secretary General because I had asked him.
Utilising an email address of a company that no longer legally exists.
Deputy, if you could let me finish.
I think the Minister should be allowed an opportunity
it's
to
not
reply.
A surprise that Katherine Zappone had email contact and text contact with the Secretary General, because I had asked the Secretary General
Minister, my question was
to finalise the
arrangements
on the back of the advice of the department. I don't know anything about Katherine Zappone's emails.
Did you not read the document?
What email address? I don't know the source of her email address, Deputy. That's a simple and honest answer. You have to ask Katherine Zappone about that.
Here's an idea. Now, Minister, I want to move on to FOI legislation. To me, this is explicitly clear what's happened here, and that there has been a clear exploitation of the weaknesses that exist in the freedom of information, and that was done for nefarious reasons. There can be no other way of interpreting this to any reasonable person. The public and the media were met with a continued wall of silence that started on the 12th of August, when the documents that were released yesterday under FOI began to issue with the acknowledgements of requests, and they continued like a flow from there on. That was an orchestrated and that was a deliberate act to erode public access to information, to how public money is spent and how ministers like yourself and others and government departments operate. Now, this act is designed to contribute to transparency, to openness, but in this case, it was categorically used to limit the release of information in what I believe was an orchestrated plan by you and others in Fine Gael to control the narrative of what happened around the Katherine Zappone appointment. You sought to confuse, to distract, and to double down on the underhanded nature of this appointment, which was clearly made in March. In fact, the only actions that
Final minute, Deputy Clerk. You're into the final minute. You haven't asked a question yet.
I want to move on to some questions.
No, Deputy. I would like to respond to that accusation, if I may. My department, the department and the Department of Foreign Affairs officials have worked night and day to publish yesterday the largest ever set of records we've ever published on dfa.ie under the Freedom of Information Act. My officials advised me that we have fully complied with the obligations of the Act and have upheld the department's long-standing commitment to handling FOI requests transparently and with minimum redaction in compliance with the Act. And I think it's important that I get that on the record.
Okay. Well, while we're talking about compliance with the Act, you said previously...
Final question, Deputy Clerk.
...to this committee. And if that were true, why, and you've admitted this yourself a few minutes ago, that you delete text messages when conversations conclude, why then was a section released under FOI yesterday relating to general chit-chat about Biden election? Why was that not deleted? Why did the data done from the department yesterday have us try to believe that you retain messages from November 2020, you delete messages between you and the Taoiseach?
Yeah,
brief response from the Minister.
Yeah, that's a fair question. The reason I didn't delete the text messages from Katherine Zappone was because I wanted to be, first of all, absolutely transparent, and they were still on my phone. As far as I was concerned, the conversation with Katherine Zappone, which was primarily around this role that we're now discussing, went on for quite a long time. And so what I actually didn't have an obligation to release the texts of around the Biden election and so on under FOI because it doesn't relate to government business. But I wanted to release all texts between myself and Katherine Zappone that I had on my phone, and that is what I did. Unfortunately, I didn't have the text exchange still on my phone with the Taoiseach for reasons that I outlined earlier, and that's why I was very pleased that he published those texts, which were consistent in terms of content with what I said to the committee last week.
I'm sure you were absolutely
Thank you, Minister.
Those text messages. But finally, Minister.
Sorry, Deputy Clerk, we've gone over the time. We may have an opportunity later on, Deputy Clerk, to come back.
It is the final part of the question.
Deputy Clerk, please. Our time is exhausted.
If you are not hiding messages, and if you were committed to transparency,
Deputy Clerk,
put out your
I'm
phone
sorry.
there, Minister, and tell us the last text message you have on it from Leo Bradford and the first text message from the Taoiseach. Pop out your phone there, Minister, and tell us.
I'm sorry, Deputy Clerk. I'm moving on to Deputy Cathal Berry. Maybe an opportunity to answer that question before the end of the meeting if people keep within the guidelines. Deputy Berry, thank you.
And good morning, Minister. And Minister, thank you for your opening statement and for the apology that was contained within. I just have three brief questions, really. They're kind of technical in nature, so maybe yourself or your team might be able to answer them over the next few minutes. The first question, really, I suppose I should start by acknowledging the large treasure trove of documentation that was uploaded on the DFA website yesterday. It was very, very useful and helpful. My question is, we appear to be missing one record. It's record number 94. If you look at the sequence there, it's 094_90. And we moved from 93 to 95, but there's no record 94. So I guess my question is, are we still waiting for a text message screen grab to be uploaded? Or perhaps this is just an administrative oversight where there was a typo in the sequencing of the record number. So that's record number 94. That's the first question. The second question is, there was a lot of email traffic in relation to whether a contract of employment was going to be finalised for Katherine Zappone. We know that there was terms of reference and we know there was a concept paper. So I guess my question was there ever really a contract of employment finalised for Katherine Zappone? And did she sign anything or date anything? Or was there any formal arrangement from that point of view? And then just the last question, there was some email traffic in relation to whether the 50 days a year that she would be working for a 2-year period, was it going to be reckonable from a pensions perspective? So I guess, was there any final decision in relation to that whether the temporary short-term job that she was doing, would it be reckonable from a pensions point of view? So just to be fair to the Minister, they're the only questions I have. And if you could answer those questions, or perhaps even cover some of the other questions from the other members of the Oireachtas, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Deputy Berry. Minister, to respond to the three questions.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding, just looking at one of my officials here, is that there's nothing missing from the record, and I suspect that 94 is just a I suspect it probably should have gone straight from 93 to 95. I'm not sure. If there is anything in that, though, we'll obviously come back to the committee in writing directly on it. But certainly people are shaking their heads here in relation to that being an issue. Everything has been published and is on the website that we have. That's the website of the Department of Foreign Affairs. In terms of the email traffic and the finalisation of the job spec and the contract of employment, I'm going to ask Niall Burgess to deal with that, because he was the one who dealt with Katherine in person when she was in Dublin on some of those issues. And then thirdly, in terms of the pension issue, we did clarify that, I remember, after the cabinet meeting, because it was raised, and this role and any payment linked to it was not going to add to her pension entitlements. That's my understanding. But I'll ask Niall if he could give you a brief outline in relation to the finalisation of the job spec, if you like, and then the discussions in terms of contract of employment.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess.
The meeting which I had with Katherine Zappone was primarily on the tasking. And again, the tasking that was agreed and finalised was prepared wholly by the department. There was one amendment, I should say, to the arrangements as a result of my meeting with Katherine Zappone, and that was on the duration of the mandate. She proposed that a 2-year mandate would allow more time for the mandate to establish itself, to build up a network and to show results. I felt that was a reasonable point, and I proposed that to the Minister. But the tasking, as agreed, was wholly prepared by the department. The work had begun on the development of a contract before the government meeting and had continued in the days after the government meeting. There are exchanges with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. Although we had delegated authority to create this position, we were in touch with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform around ensuring best practice in the development of the contract. That contract was never finalised because Katherine Zappone withdrew before anything could be put to her and signed.
That's great. Thank you, Minister, and thank you, SecGen.
Thank you, Deputy Barry.
Questions, so
Okay.
I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Moving to Senator Catherine Arda, followed by Deputy Stanton. Senator Arda, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Minister, for returning to our committee. I also think it's important and be remiss not to commend the chair and commend the members of the committee. And we know today that there's a lot more information in the public domain in relation to this matter than there was last time we met. So I think we're going through a very valid exercise in relation to this questioning and this interrogation the interrogation today. I just want to say I have a few short questions. The first, or comments really, is that I find it quite like a docrecha, I suppose. I'll use the Irish word because I will be commenting from a programme this morning, or a wajan, that a narrative is being peddled that Katherine Zappone misunderstood what the Minister was offering her on the 26th of February. She's a very capable woman, she's a former Minister, and it just beggars belief that she would get the messaging wrong, that a role wasn't being offered to her. I note that other members of the Oireachtas are on radio this morning and on the Wajan programme, where one of my colleagues says that ní raibh an post le huairt ag Simon Coveney agus mar sin bhí mí hiiscint a bhí an agus sin agus níor gá an buíochas oh, Katherine Zappone. So she sort of completely got this wrong. So it'd be interesting also to find out from Katherine Zappone now if that is the case. Like, does she believe she got the messaging on the 4th of March wrong? And if so, I wonder, has the Minister been in touch with her, or if anybody has been in touch with her in relation to what her thoughts are on this? The second misunderstanding I'd like to raise with the Minister is that of the Taoiseach. We know on the 28th of July, the Taoiseach said that he understood that Katherine Zappone asked Simon Coveney for the role. This is reported in the Irish Times and the RTE News. And repeatedly today, Minister, you say that it was clear that the role came from you. You stated to my colleague, James Lawless, that the communication was very clear one way from you, from your department, to former Minister Zappone, and you asked her specifically if she would be interested in the role of a special envoy. So I'm quite interested in how the Taoiseach also came to this misunderstanding. Another short matter as well, and it's just, I suppose it's going back over a lot of ground that's been covered, just in relation to the text messages. You say that you're very glad the Taoiseach published the text messages that you deleted because it completely backs up what you said to the committee. I disagree with that. At the meeting, Minister, you said the text from the Taoiseach said that you're speaking to Zappone and that you're wondering, is there anything he needs to know? Where in fact, the Taoiseach texted you asking specifically about the special envoy role. You then said to us last week that you wrote back to the Taoiseach and said, oh, it was just a concept of the special envoy role. Whereas the texts from the Taoiseach actually go further, and there's a lot of detail in those texts in relation to the type of contract. So I would just put forward that there is a large discrepancy between your statements and your sort of version of the text and the actual text. And I would go to say so much that they aren't consistent with what you said last week. And I just would like to finally say that, and I know many of my colleagues mentioned it today, just do you still believe that you weren't lobbied for this role? I think that's a really important question to ask, and I think it's a really important that you answer that question, because it's remarkable how many people were contacted in relation to the role. And I think everyone at home is just thinking, imagine going for a job interview and being able to, come up with the job yourself and write the role. And it's astonishing. And I think people deserve answers, and they deserve a bit of transparency. And I think it's time here today. We're giving you an opportunity to sort of come clean and let us know exactly what happened. So thanks.
Okay, Minister, to respond. Thank you, Minister.
Yeah, quite a number of questions there, and I just want to thank the Deputy for that. And on the initial one, that the narrative is being peddled that Katherine Zappone misunderstood what was on offer, and you asked me the question, did I speak to Katherine recently? I rang Katherine Zappone on Sunday, but it was a courtesy call to say that the department was going to be releasing an extensive file on Monday. It wasn't a long conversation, and she asked me what was being released, and I went through the text messages that she had sent to me that I was releasing, but that was to give her the courtesy of letting her know that. In terms of the text exchange with the Taoiseach, I mean, first of all, if I was trying to hide this exchange, why would I have raised it? I was the first person to raise this to the committee last week when I was asked the question. I think it was by Barry Cameron, but I suspect maybe by Senator Arda and others as well. And so I volunteered that information to try to be helpful. I think it was helpful that Leo Varadkar subsequently published those texts, which he still had. And what the text that he sent to me was, "Hi, seeing Katherine Zappone on Wednesday, do you know anything about her becoming our LGBT envoy?" So it wasn't in the text that I was offering her a job. He was simply asking the question because he didn't know anything about it, which backs up what I said, which is simply the truth, that the Taoiseach had no hand, act or part in this. He didn't even know what was going on, but she had raised it with him. And so he was asking me what was going on. I didn't have the benefit, actually, when I spoke to you last week, of the text exchange between Katherine Zappone and Leo Varadkar. I simply recollected that he had told me that he was meeting Katherine Zappone and he wanted to be up to speed. And I said, I think last week, that I don't recall the exact text of those exchanges. I think I said that twice, actually, because I wanted to cover the fact that I was relying on memory. But certainly, I think the thrust of those texts are the same as what I outlined to you last week. I would like to have had those texts, and I would have been more accurate. But certainly, after the Taoiseach published them, I'm glad to clarify that.
In terms of, I note some outstanding questions, Minister. Senator Arda, thank you.
Okay,
Minister.
Yeah, no, just I think that's the main thrust of the. Oh yeah, sorry, just on lobbying again. Look, all I can do is say to you what I experienced during this period. I saw the text messages that came from Katherine Zappone to me as, an enthusiastic person who wanted to get an update. I didn't see it as lobbying. I didn't feel any pressure. If I had, I think I probably would have responded to those texts, and I didn't. Instead, I simply left the department deal with the issue as to whether we were going to move ahead with this process or not, and they did extensive work on that. So, she sent me a number of texts over a number of months following a conversation that I had with her because she was enthusiastic about that role. But I can absolutely see why, given the narrative that's developed since, why many people would see that as lobbying, but I certainly didn't see it as that.
Fine. Thank you. Time is exhausted, Senator Arda. So I'm going to proceed to the next questioner, Deputy Stanton, followed by Senator Lynn Boylan in substitution for Senator O'Donnell, and then Senator Wilson. So Deputy Stanton, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Again, I want to thank the Minister for coming to us today and for the information that was given to us, quite a substantial amount of information which took a while to read and go through. One question that's been bugging me a little bit is, a lot of this started because obviously the documentation arrived at the Cabinet table without going through the other meetings prior to that. And I'm just a bit at a loss as to how come that happened. How is it that it didn't appear at the other meetings first with the party leaders or with the advisors as normal? So the Minister might actually maybe comment on that initially.
Yeah, no, Deputy, that's a very fair question. This was the last government meeting before the summer broke up. I was bringing, I think, 6 memos to Cabinet that day. On a whole range of things, from there was a Brexit briefing, there was an update on the Security Council, there was a memo around the possibility of competing for a sports event, and there was also a memo in terms of appointing ambassadors to key roles. In the build-up to a Cabinet meeting, there would often be, there is always a briefing between advisors in the days beforehand to make sure that everything is planned and so on. But it would also be normal that when briefings are given, names aren't necessarily included attached to appointments out of fears of leaks or whatever before the Cabinet meeting. And that's what happened here. But that would be normal. The mistake that I made was that I simply should have given the Taoiseach or his key advisor a heads up to say, look, you know, on the ambassadors, which he would have had detail on, but on the Katherine Zappone appointment, and I didn't do that. And as a result, the Taoiseach, when this came up in Cabinet, was surprised by it. He wasn't annoyed, but he was surprised. And I subsequently apologised to him for that, because that shouldn't have happened. As I said earlier, the Taoiseach should never be surprised by something that comes up in a Cabinet meeting. That was an error that shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I note as well that we have at the moment 2 other special envoys doing very, very important and valuable work. Tom Arnold and Kenneth Thompson on food systems and they're in Africa. It's very important work, which I wasn't actually aware of that up to now, but it's hugely valuable. Can I assume that both of these envoys were appointed in a similar way to the proposed appointment of Katherine Zappone? In other words, that it went through due diligence in the department, that her role was actually, that the work was actually identified as being hugely important, and that the appointments were made. And also, the whole concept of a special envoy versus an ambassador at large. Can you? I don't think we have any ambassadors at large, but other EU countries have. I noticed there are about 10 countries in the European Union so far that have roles similar to the one that was proposed for Katherine Zappone. So they see it as hugely important that civic space, as they term it, is represented, and that it has been quoted in one of the documents that Ireland's voice should be heard loud in this area. I also note that the LGBTI strategy does mandate the Department of Foreign Affairs to work internationally to promote LGBTI plus rights. And can the Minister tell me, out of all that, is there a proposal now, and seeing as this role is so important, to actually nominate somebody else, to appoint somebody else to the proposed position?
Yeah, quite a number of questions there. I mean, just first of all, on international practice here, and you know, the paper of the 29th of March shows that Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, the UK have a whole series of special envoys in a whole series of different areas. The United States, Canada. So all of the countries that are in the sort of same foreign policy space as Ireland was doing this, which is why I never saw this as controversial. I mean, that may have been a mistake, but I thought that the nomination of a special envoy in this area was consistent with our foreign policy, was consistent with what other countries were doing, and I thought that Katherine Zappone's appointment would be welcomed, because she has effectively campaigned all her life on some of these issues. So that's where I was coming from on this. You know, in relation to Tom Arnold and Ken Thompson, it's slightly different there, because the Tom Arnold appointment as a special envoy for food systems came from 2 departments, my department and the Department of Agriculture. Tom Arnold is an expert in development, nutrition, and sustainable food production. And he's done a lot of extensive work, particularly in Africa, in that space. And so he was an obvious choice. But the way in which special envoys work is that you want a specific job done. And generally, somebody then gets handpicked because of the skill set that they have to do that job. It's often a temporary position. It's sometimes not paid, and it sometimes is paid. It depends on the circumstances. In relation to Ken Thompson, that's different because he was a special envoy for the Department of Foreign Affairs. That special envoy role, because it wasn't a government special envoy, it's Department of Foreign Affairs, didn't go to Cabinet. The reason why Ken Thompson is in that role is that we don't have any ambassadors or embassies in Francophone Africa. And that was a big part of our Security Council campaign. And so we asked him to work in that geographical part of Africa, and he's been doing a good job there. So that's essentially the context in terms of what we were doing.
Getting back to the names, there's one email in the records release yesterday with no content, but it looks like the full cabinet memo with names was sent by other part of the Secretary General of the Government as a Taoiseach section the night before the meeting. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And the final question is, with respect to deleting the text messages, did you, and the phishing and hacking that went on, were you advised formally by security services to delete text messages, and do you delete them on all platforms or just that particular platform?
Well, certainly I was advised around that particular incident. I handed my phone over. I got a replacement phone during that period. I mean, my department is both of my departments are very conscious around security and phones and data and the potential risk of hacking. It's not something I want to go into in any detail for obvious reasons publicly, but that is an issue that the department has some expertise around, and so it should have.
Yeah, we do know that others, Engine Martin others, have been hacked in the past. Can you tell me, Minister, just
into the final minute, Deputy Stanton.
The final question, Chairman. Is it the intention of the Department of the Government to replace Katherine Zappone, to appoint somebody else to do that? What seems to me to be quite important work.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, we're assessing this whole area now because of the controversy around it. And certainly if there is to be a special envoy appointed in this space, it'll be done through, an open competition where, people's submissions will be invited publicly. I think the Taoiseach said that yesterday, and I think he's right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Senator Lynn Boylan, in substitution for Senator O'Donnell. Senator Boylan, you're welcome to this committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Minister. I suppose, to start off, I think everybody who's watching this at home would say that it stinks, and I don't think anything we've heard today would change their opinion of that. In fact, I think it's now questions for the Minister for Finance as well as to what his role was in this whole process. But I think for any ordinary Joe or Jane Soap watching on, what they see is somebody who has access to very senior politicians and has availed of that access in order to secure herself employment. And you say that's not lobbying. I think most people at home would say that is lobbying because it's seeking to influence the outcome. So it seems that it's not just Leo that delivers for his friends. It seems that this is the way the Fine Gael do their business. But you said that, so we know from Minister O'Donoghue that Katherine Zappone called him about an intro to Samantha Power, and he suggests that she should talk to you. So I suppose the first question is, Minister, did you make that call or did Katherine Zappone phone you?
So, Deputy, in relation to my exchanges with Katherine Zappone, she texted me on the 22nd of February, which is on the file, and she refers to USAID and the possibility of working with USAID on women, girls, gender equality issues and LGBTQ issues. And then she goes on to say Biden has promised to appoint LGBT folks at high levels and so on. So that was the first contact I had with her since I spoke to her briefly to wish her well when she was leaving Ireland many months earlier. After that, I spoke to my Secretary General on the 24th of February. And at the end of a meeting, which was dealing with other things, I said to her, that I had got a text from Katherine Zappone. She's in New York. Do you think she could be an addition to our team in New York? And would that be a useful possibility? He was positive on that and said, look, he wanted to think about it. And I said, fair enough. On the 26th then, on the 26th, I got a missed call from Katherine Zappone. I hadn't spoken to her. I got a missed call from her, and I called her back. And I said to her that I had spoken to the Secretary General about whether or not she could play a useful role in New York. But I had made no mention at that point of the special envoy role because I didn't know anything about it. It was subsequently a few days later when my Secretary General came back to me to say that the Biden administration was moving ahead with the special envoy role.
So Minister, just if I can just, because a lot of that has been repeated, just so when you spoke to Katherine Zappone, did you say to her that it wouldn't be appropriate for you to set up an intro with Samantha Power?
I didn't respond on the Samantha Power thing with her at all. I didn't think that was appropriate, and I certainly don't.
So when you had the conversation on the 26th of February, and the fact that Katherine Zappone had initially reached out to you looking for an intro to Samantha Power, that didn't come up in the conversation.
I told her I had no introduction to make for her to any UN organisation.
So it did come up in the course of the conversation.
Well, she had texted me about it, and she spoke to me about the work that she was doing in UNFPA and her interest in USAID. And I said I didn't have any contacts there, and that I wouldn't be making any introduction to her for her on that.
And at that point, then you discussed the fact that there might be a role for her within the Irish government instead of introducing her to USAID.
No. That's not true, Lynn. That was a conversation previous to that on the 24th. I hadn't spoken to Katherine Zappone when I spoke to Niall Burgess. That's and the text messages and their chronology show that.
Okay, so on the 4th of March then, so things have moved very swiftly between the first phone call you had with Katherine Zappone and your conversation with your Secretary General. Katherine Zappone then mistakenly, you're saying, believes that she was offered a job. But it was subject to a department review of whether such a role was required. And yet she queries the time period of the appointment and what are the next steps that she needs to take. So I think, Minister, for any of us watching, it's like, are you honestly asking us that this is somebody who is a minister, who has now mistakenly believed that she's been offered a job because she's asking you, what's the time period of this appointment? What's the next steps? You're saying that the conversation you had was around, a concept role that she would have, that she would engage with the department around the role. So you say it would have been helpful to clarify it at that point that it wasn't a job offer, and you didn't do that. But then in May, Katherine Zappone then asks if any word of the job and a June start date, which I think should have set off alarm bells, I suppose, then within the department that, hang on a second, this woman clearly thinks she has a job and it hasn't been finalised. So I suppose the question is, when was she actually offered the job? And how was that done? Was it done over the phone? Was it done through email? Was it done through a WhatsApp message? How was Katherine Zappone, and on what date was she officially informed that she now had a role as a special envoy?
Well, that was only the week before the government, when papers were sent for my approval from the Secretary General. But I had specifically asked, because I didn't want to get involved in the job spec in relation to expenses or payment or anything like that. It was a matter for the department, which is why I asked the Secretary General to deal with those issues with her, and he did. And in the normal way, a memo would then come to me to sign off. From recollection, I was in Africa at that stage, and it came and I signed off on it, and then it went to Cabinet, and Cabinet gave approval for this appointment, which I think is important to say before the controversy then erupted afterwards. So this was a government appointment, and it went through the appropriate build up to that in terms of assessments, recommendations, and so forth.
So when you have somebody who's, I suppose, contacting various ministers and the ambassador inquiring about a job that she hasn't actually been formally, at no point did the department think it might be appropriate to go back to Katherine Zappone and go, cool the jets here, Katherine. There's no job as of yet. That hasn't been finalised. We're still going through the process of terms and conditions and whether or not an envoy is needed. So at no point, nobody in the department thought we might actually, it would be good for us to contact Katherine Zappone and say there isn't a job as of yet.
Well, just to say,
final minute,
as I said at the start, Senator, it would have been helpful, I think, particularly now when we're looking at these texts and, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, it would have been helpful if after her enthusiastic texts of the 4th of March, I mean, she was excited about the possibility of the role. If I had gone back to her to say, look, you know, there's no done deal here. We need to go through a process, but I simply have been talking to you about a concept. It would have been helpful if I'd done that, and I didn't. But I think if you look at her texts, at no point have I gone back to her to encourage her or to say things are, you know, concluding or anything like that. You know, if anything, I didn't correspond with her. I simply left this issue in the hands of the department, which was the appropriate place to leave it.
But why would
Final
she
brief
then,
question.
Minister, on the 3rd of March say to you, when she's delighted about this job that she hasn't actually got, that's great, and I've spoken to Minister Donoghue as well. So if the thing is that she's to be involved in a process, a concept process to explore whether or not there's going to be an envoy, what role would Minister Donoghue have in that? Why would she need to speak to him and tell you that she's spoken to him?
Brief response.
Well, I mean, I don't know the conversations she had with Minister Donoghue. All I know is that she spoke to Minister Donoghue at the end of last year and asked him for advice on career options. And that Pascal mentioned that to me early in the new year. So I wasn't surprised when I got a text from Katherine Zappone reaching out to me.
Thank you, Senator Boylan and Minister. My next speaker, Senator Diarmuid Woodson. Can I remind members, actually, there has been mention throughout this meeting of other ministers, in particular reference to the Minister for Finance, Pascal Donoghue. I would remind members of a statement issued by Minister Donoghue yesterday afternoon. If it hasn't been circulated to everyone, I'll ensure that it is, because it does contain matters of clarification that have been referred to by way of questions to Minister Coveney, which I don't think it is expected that Minister Coveney might be in a position to respond upon. Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. I certainly will not be mentioning any other minister's names. I want to thank the Minister Coveney and his officials for coming here this morning to talk to us. And just can I briefly ask just a number of points. Can I ask the Minister if you're familiar with Section 7 of the National Archives Act 1986? And just to be helpful, can I read this section to the committee? It's not very long, it won't take all but half a minute. It states quite clearly, subject to the provisions of Section 19.3 and 19.4, departmental records shall, unless they are transferred to the National Archives in accordance with Section 8 or are disposed of under subsection 5, be retained and preserved in the Department of State in which they were made or are held, and shall not in any case be disposed of, except in accordance with subsection 5, provided that where more than one copy of such a record exists, the retention and preservation of the original, or if the original is no longer available, of an accurate and complete copy thereof shall suffice. Now, Minister, can I ask you, how does your practice of regularly deleting texts involving government business which form records of your ministerial activities not breach this Act? Where is the more than one copy of your texts to Katherine Zappone in the documents released yesterday afternoon? Why does there appear to be no copy or record of your responses or exchanges? And can I ask you, Minister, are you still deleting texts to do with government business conducted on your phone? That's the first number of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy. And I've referred to the security issues that that I have to be aware of in terms of my job already to a number of your colleagues, and I have to factor in that issue in terms of trying to be prudent with how I manage data on my phone, and that is that is what has resulted in me clearing text exchanges that I regard as concluded and over. And in terms of the responses to Katherine Zappone's texts, I have published all exchanges with Katherine Zappone from a text perspective. It looks as if I haven't published my responses to her texts. That's because, by and large, I didn't respond to her texts because I felt that this issue was being managed by the department, and that was appropriate. That was the most appropriate place for it to be managed. That's the simple explanation, Deputy, and it's backed up with the documents.
Thank you. Senator Woodson.
I think you're on mute, Deputy. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, there was some interference there, so I muted. Apologies about that. Yeah, could I just ask you, Minister, just to clarify, are you still deleting text messages that have to do with government business from your phone?
Well, I mean, I'm still cautious in terms of how data is managed and held on my phone, and if I'm not required under obligation to hold on to data, or if it's not relevant, in other words, if the conversations have concluded, then I generally clear those messages, and I suspect many other people do the same.
But just to be clear on this, Minister, I was of the understanding that any documentation, including text messages, to do with official government business, whether it is conducted by email or on your phone or by any other means, in writing, email, etc., that was to be retained. Are you saying to us here now that you are not doing that, given all that we've come across over the last
anything to do with government business is the property of the department, and I certainly do not and will not clear messages that relate to government business on my phone. I'm talking about other interactions that I have when issues are closed. I simply move on from them, and I don't keep unnecessary data. That's the position.
I just wanted to be clear that in relation to any government business conducted on your phone or any other device or email, etc., that is not deleted in either of your departments.
That's right.
Because that was the case, unfortunately.
Well, that isn't the way I saw it, but I can understand how you might interpret it that way.
And just finally then, Minister, very briefly, are you satisfied that there is no further information in relation to this matter that we are not aware of?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
This is the end of the matter.
I certainly hope so, because I think it's dragged on for far too long.
Thank you, Minister. Members, we're coming towards the end of the meeting. I don't, because of COVID restrictions, have any facility for time added on, but I did say that I would try and revert to members on the matter of very brief supplementaries, and I'm going to do so with the indulgence of the Minister. I'm going to call for one brief question each on Deputy Gannon, Deputy Clark, Deputy Brady, Senator Crockwell and Deputy Cowan. I'm going to bunch the questions, I'm going to group the questions, and then I'm going to ask the Minister to respond briefly. We've had a 2-hour session. We've had many questions to the Minister, and we have had many issues clarified. But in the interest of ensuring that everybody has an opportunity, I'm calling on Deputy Gannon for a brief, direct question to the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. You might just confirm 2 things from your statement for me. And you mentioned that you don't know Samantha Power well enough, and it would have been inappropriate anyway to refer a text message you got from Katherine Zappone asking for an introduction. So, despite thinking that the text message looking for an introduction was inappropriate on February 22nd, you still consider worthy enough to be appointed as UN envoy that you asked your Secretary General on February the 24th to go off and develop the role, despite believing that a text message you'd received 2 days previously was inappropriate. And then secondly, You don't believe that Katherine Zappone was lobbying as you didn't feel under pressure. Now, I want to ask as such, do you not accept that seeking to influence senior ministers, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for Finance, Taoiseach, and the Ambassador to the UN, seeking to influence those positions in relation to the awarding of a prestigious job constitutes lobbying, in your opinion, as a Minister of 10 years and as a Member of Parliament for over 20?
We've had that one before. Deputy Clerk.
Apologies, Chair, I was muted there. One final question, Minister. Why is there no record of any communication between you and your Secretary-General regarding this appointment? There's no text, there's no emails, there's no minutes of meetings or anything. And is it the case that text messages between you and your Secretary-General have also been deleted?
Thank you. Deputy Brady.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, Chair. A couple of very brief points. Minister, on the 19th of July, a text communication between yourself and the Taoiseach when he inquired about the position, the LGB envoy position, you stated that, yeah, I spoke to Katherine tonight. She's meeting Niall Burgess on Wednesday to finalise a 12-month contract to be an Irish government special envoy. We now know that that changed to a 2-year position. And Niall Burgess, in his interaction earlier on, he said that a 2-year rather than a 1-year contract will be better for the envoy role. And that was what Katherine Zappone had said to him at that meeting on the 21st. So, Minister, not alone had we Katherine Zappone writing the terms of her own contract, a contract that you had offered her, a position that you had offered her clearly on the 4th of March, we now have Katherine Zappone going into that secretary meeting with the Secretary-General and dictating the duration of that contract, which you clearly believed was a 12-month contract. She went in and negotiated a 2-year contract. Minister, when were you made aware of that? It's bizarre that there are zero communications between your Secretary-General and yourself, emails, text messages, minutes, nothing exists.
Thank you.
And the final point I just want to make, Minister, last week you misled the committee in terms of why you deleted text messages. You stated it was for data storage reasons. That quickly changed to then your phone being hacked. So I've very specific questions in relation to that alleged phone hacking. Was that what I deem as a national security, potential national security breach? Why was that not communicated with
Deputy Brady.
There's national cabinet confidentiality here, and you did not communicate that with the Taoiseach. Why was it not communicated with the Data Protection Commissioner, and why was it not communicated with the Data Protection Officer within the department as well?
Thank you. Senator Crockwell. Direct question and brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be as quickly as I can. The fact that we delete messages doesn't mean that they're gone. What steps have you taken to recover the messages that were deleted, Minister? Secondly, will you release the report from the Garda and the cyber security people? And added to that, will you also release the notice you gave to the Director of Intelligence and the Director of the CIS Corps in the Defence Forces?
Well, I think there are some security issues there, but I'll leave that to the Minister. And final question, Deputy Cowan. Deputy Cowan, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair. Minister, Katherine Zappone contacts you on foot of a recommendation to the Finance Minister looking for an introduction to Samantha Power, the US Ambassador to the UN, for a job in the UN. You say no, but you'll have an idea that will allow you work in the UN. And leave it with me, more or less, is what you said. Gee, thanks, Minister. I'll help put it together with your officials in the meantime. Now, you believe that the initial conversation, conversation around the concept and her prompting for a role in the UN was not lobbying. We have to accept that. I don't necessarily agree with it, but you stand by your understanding of the legislation associated with lobbying. But thereafter, Katherine Zappone subsequently sought updates, clarity and input into that offer or that concept being realised and honoured, both from yourself, from the Taoiseach and also, by the way, the US Ambassador. That clearly would appear to be pressure being applied for the concept, the offer, the commitment to be realised as initiated by you. So if it wasn't initially lobbying, do you believe, or do you at least begin to see the reality emerge on foot of your initial concept offering, that there was clear and obvious lobbying on the part of this person to those mentioned to realise the commitment, the concept, the offer that you had made initially?
Thank you. I'm reverting now to you, Minister, but I'm conscious that many of the supplementary questions are questions, the subject matter of which you've already dealt with. But in any event, I will ask you to deal with the questions on the part of those 5 members as directly and as succinctly as you can over the next few minutes. I thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I just on Deputy Dick Gannon's question as to whether I thought Katherine Zappone was a suitable candidate to work for the Irish government as a special envoy. I thought she was. Katherine Zappone is not someone who I have a close personal relationship with, but is someone who I have a professional respect for. And I thought, but so too did my Sec Gen, that potentially she could assist our team in New York. But we had to go through a long process before that could be confirmed, and that's what we tried to do, or that's what we did. In relation to Deputy Clerk, why is there no record of texts between the Sec Gen and me? That's because the Sec Gen and I speak all the time. His office is below mine, and we talk in person all the time. And
but there's no minutes of those either, Minister.
Yeah, but you know, if you look at the number of times that the Sec Gen and I spoke about this particular position, there were very few conversations took place, and they were informal conversations by and large. But the records will show that it was the Sec Gen who then asked for and instructed the department to develop this concept further, and we got a very positive response from other experts in the department in relation to that concept. Deputy Brady asked a question, which is a fair enough question, but I think that former Secretary General Niall Burgess answered it during the course of this meeting. How did it come about that a 12-month contract, which was my understanding until that changed, became a 2-year contract? And there was a clear reasoning around that, and that was supported by the department. They thought that that moving from 12 months to 24 months made sense in terms of the objectives that we had attached to this role. In relation to data storage, look, I mean, I'm somewhat limited in terms of what I can say around that security breach, and I hope that Senator Crockwell will understand that. But all I can say is that after that data security breach that took place, I spoke to my department, I spoke to the Department of Defence, both at the highest level, and got advice and expertise in terms of how I should proceed. And that involved Garda Síochána and the National Cybersecurity Centre. And I'm not sure what more I could have done in relation to that particular issue. And I'm, you know, I certainly have not seen individual reports in relation to that, but I certainly don't think that the Gardaí are likely to release anything.
Sorry, have you released the notice you gave to them?
So I handed my phone over to Garda Síochána, and they took it from there and worked with the department on that. In terms of Deputy Cowan's questions, I can understand why the public looking at this, political fiasco as it's unfolded, would interpret this in the way that some of you have, as this being lobbying and so on. All I can say is that I got this, initial contact. I regarded that I was trying to develop something that could be an asset to the country in the context of the work that we were doing around foreign policy, particularly through and around the UN, and the department developed that with the support of both myself and the Sec Gen. Katherine Zappone was hugely enthusiastic about that opportunity and clearly was looking for regular updates in terms of if it was going to materialise and where it was going. That's the way I saw it. But I can, I'm not sure there's ever been an appointment that has had the level of scrutiny that this particular appointment has had. And I can certainly understand why other people would would see it differently, but I think the facts show that the account that I've given today is actually what happened. And that's what I'm trying to explain to you today. And once again, can I apologise for the fact that this committee has had to sit a second time on this issue. To be perfectly honest with you, they shouldn't have had to sit even on one sitting on this issue. I should have been able to clarify these issues a lot earlier, and I didn't do that. I regret that. And I thank the committee for their patience and their time.
Thank you, Minister. On behalf of the committee, indeed on my own behalf, I want to, in the first instance, acknowledge your apology to the committee, which was tendered at the outset. But I want to thank you for meeting with us again. And I want to thank you also for dealing with the members' questions in such a comprehensive manner. I want also to thank your officials for attending and for their contributions. If there are any further issues that require any further elaboration arising from this meeting, I would ask that matters be committed to writing and tendered to us in the normal way. And in bringing matters to a conclusion, I want to say to members, I want to thank you for your questions, I want to thank you for your input, your contributions, and say that we will meet again on Tuesday next at 11 a.m. In private to discuss our autumn schedule of meetings and our work programme for the remainder of the year. So thank you, Minister, and members for attending.
Chair, before we finish, I sent you an email last night, Chair, just because I think there's been obviously an awful lot of conversation around former Minister Katherine Zappone, and I think it would be only appropriate that Katherine Zappone would be invited before the committee, because there's still some very, very serious and outstanding issues that I think need clarity, need further explanation and further information. So I think it is incumbent on us now as a committee to correspond to Katherine Zappone and invite her before a committee meeting at the earliest opportunity.
I suggest we deal with this issue in the usual way, and we can have an opportunity at our meeting on Tuesday next. Thank you, members. Thank you, Minister. Until 11.